January 17th, 1945, 6:43 A. And German Panzer Lehr Division command post sits in the frozen Belgian countryside, 19.8 kilometers behind the front lines, inside a requisitioned farmhouse. Officers huddle around maps, planning the day's counterattack. They have chosen this location carefully. German artillery doctrine says they are safe here, beyond effective Allied artillery range, beyond the reach of American guns. At 6:44 a.m., a 240mm shell, weighing 360 pounds, crashes through the roof at 1,200 feet per second. The explosion kills 17 officers instantly, including 2 regimental commanders and the divisional operations officer. The command post ceases to exist. The entire division's offensive capability evaporates in 230 seconds. German survivors later found fragments of the shell casing. They measured the trajectory. They calculated the range, 20.1 kilometers. Impossible, according to everything they had been taught. But the wreckage did not lie. American artillery had just rewritten the rules of the battlefield, and German armor doctrine was about to discover it was fighting with obsolete assumptions. Here is what you are about to discover: how a single weapon system forced the most sophisticated armored force in military history to completely abandon their tactical playbook, and why the Germans never figured out how to counter it until it was far too late. For decades, the German army had built its doctrine on a simple mathematical truth. Artillery has limited ranges. If you position your command posts, your supply dumps, your staging areas beyond that range, you are safe. It is physics. It is geometry. It is certainty. German field manuals from 1939 through 1943 specified maximum effective ranges for Allied artillery. British 25-pounder field guns topped out at 12,250 meters. American 155mm howitzers reached 14,600 meters. Even the heavy pieces, the big guns that took hours to emplace, rarely exceeded 16 kilometers. So German planners created a doctrine built on a 15-kilometer buffer zone. Stay beyond that, and you could operate freely. This was not arrogance. This was sound tactical reasoning based on real intelligence. German observers had measured Allied artillery ranges in North Africa, in Italy, across France in 1944. The data was consistent. The ranges were known. The safety zone was real. Panzer divisions used this knowledge to devastating effect. They would probe forward with reconnaissance, engage with their main force, then withdraw to rally points and command posts positioned in that sacred 15 to 18-kilometer buffer. Out of reach, safe to regroup, refuel, and plan the next move. But in December 1944 something changed, and at first the Germans could not figure out what. Let me show you what started happening. Panzer Division would engage American forces near Bastogne. Standard tactics. After the engagement, they would pull back to predetermined positions 17 kilometers behind the line. Command staff would establish in a village. Officers would gather for briefings. And then, without warning, massive explosions. Not from aircraft, not from some flanking maneuver, from artillery, from impossible distances. The first few times German commanders assumed it was coincidence. Maybe they had miscalculated the distance. Maybe American forces had advanced faster than reported. But then it kept happening. Command posts at 18 kilometers, supply dumps at 19 kilometers, artillery batteries counter-fired from positions the Germans knew were beyond American range. After-action reports from January 1945 show German officers expressing genuine confusion. One Panzer Lehr report, captured by Allied intelligence, stated plainly that American artillery was consistently engaging targets 4 to 6 kilometers beyond previously documented maximum ranges. The report requested verification of whether Americans had deployed new weapon systems. They had, but it was not what the Germans thought. The weapon was not new. It was the M1 240mm howitzer, a gun the Americans had been using since 1943. The Germans knew about it. They had captured intelligence documents describing it, They had even examined one captured briefly in Italy in 1944. Their records showed a maximum range of 23,000 meters, which was already concerning. But here is what German intelligence missed. That 23,000-meter figure was the theoretical maximum range. What actually mattered in combat was maximum effective range, the distance at which you could reliably hit specific targets, and German analysts assumed, based on their own artillery experience, that effective range was probably 5 to 6 kilometers less than theoretical maximum. They were wrong, and the reason why reveals something about American artillery doctrine that the Germans fundamentally misunderstood. German artillery prioritized direct observation. Their forward observers called in fire on targets they could see. This meant artillery batteries positioned relatively close to the front, usually 8 to 12 kilometers back, where observers could maintain line of sight to the target area. It was accurate. It was responsive, but it was limited by what you could see. American artillery doctrine was built differently. It was built around something called the Fire Direction Center, a system that used mathematics, maps, and radio coordination to deliver indirect fire on targets no observer could see. American forward observers did not need to see the target. They needed to know where it was on a map. Then, the Fire Direction Center calculated firing solutions for batteries positioned far behind the lines. This system allowed American gunners to exploit the true maximum range of their weapons. A German 150mm howitzer, positioned 10 kilometers from the front, firing on observed targets at 14 kilometers, was using maybe 60% of its theoretical capability. An American 240mm howitzer positioned 20 kilometers back, firing on map coordinates, was using 87%. The difference was not the guns, it was the system, but there is more. The 240mm was not even the longest-range weapon the Americans deployed in the Battle of the Bulge. That distinction belonged to a weapon the Germans did not even know existed until fragments started landing on them. The M1 8-inch gun. Not a howitzer, a gun, meaning it fired at a much flatter trajectory with significantly higher velocity. Maximum range, 32,500 meters, 32.5 kilometers. And by January 1945, the USAA's First Army had 12 battalions of these weapons positioned across Belgium. German intelligence never identified them. After-action reports mention heavy American artillery of unknown type delivering fire from extreme range. But German analysts could not believe American guns could reach that far. So they rationalized. Maybe it was aircraft dropping bombs. Maybe it was infiltrating special forces with mortars. Maybe the distance calculations were wrong. The distance calculations were wrong. The distance calculations were not wrong. The Germans were just facing an artillery capability that their doctrine said should not exist. Let me paint you a picture of how this played out in January 1945. A German Panzer battalion, veterans of 2 years of fighting, pulls back after an engagement near Hufeleis. They have taken casualties but maintained cohesion. Standard withdrawal procedure. They rally at a village 21 kilometers behind the current front line, far beyond any artillery threat they have ever faced. 15 minutes after arrival, as crews dismount to refuel and officers gather to debrief, the first 240mm shell impacts in the village square. The blast wave alone knocks men off their feet 40 meters away. Shrapnel shreds through half-tracks and trucks. Before anyone can react, 5 more shells land in a precise pattern across the village. Impact interval: 8 seconds. Total time from first shell to last: 40 seconds. Casualties: 34 dead, 67 wounded, 4 tanks damaged by fragmentation. The battalion's operational strength drops by 22% without ever seeing an enemy soldier. This was not random. This was directed fire from a fire direction center coordinating multiple batteries. The Germans had been spotted by an observation aircraft. Their position plotted on a map, coordinates radioed to artillery 24 kilometers away, and within 6 minutes, steel was raining down. The psychological impact was devastating. German soldiers called it Jabos, the same term they used for fighter-bomber attacks. But this was worse, because at least with aircraft you could hear them coming. This was just sudden annihilation from an invisible source at impossible range. A captured German lieutenant from the 2nd Panzer Division, interrogated by American intelligence in late January 1945, described it like this: "We no longer have any safe area. Before, we knew where we could rest, where we could gather, where we were beyond reach. Now, nowhere is safe. The Americans can reach anywhere. It's like fighting an enemy with infinitely long arms." And here is the thing that made it even worse for German forces. They could not counter it. Because to counter battery fire effectively, you need to position your own artillery close enough to reach enemy guns. But if you position your guns at 15 kilometers to engage American batteries at 18 kilometers, the Americans simply fire from 25 kilometers. If you move your guns forward to 20 kilometers to reach those batteries, American 8-inch guns fire from 30 kilometers. It was a range war the Germans could not win, because American doctrine allowed them to use the full potential of their weapons, while German doctrine kept their guns leashed to line-of-sight observation. By February 1945, German artillery doctrine had to change. Field manuals were hastily rewritten. The 15-kilometer buffer zone was abandoned. New directives instructed commanders to assume American artillery could reach 25 kilometers and plan accordingly. But here is the brutal reality. This meant command posts, supply dumps, and staging areas now had to position 26 to 28 kilometers behind the front. At that distance, response times increased dramatically. Communication became harder. Coordination suffered. The German army was being forced to spread out, to position assets so far back that operational efficiency collapsed. All because American artillery had an effective range that German doctrine said was impossible. But there is one more layer to this story that reveals just how comprehensively the Americans had changed the game. They were not just outranging German guns, they were out-coordinating them. American artillery battalions in Northwest Europe operated under a system called Time on Target, or TOT multiple batteries, sometimes dozens of guns spread across 10 or 15 kilometers. Would calculate firing solutions so that all shells, regardless of how far each gun was from the target, would impact simultaneously. A German position would not receive steady shelling. They would receive every single shell at once, in a 2 to 3 second window, with no warning. German artillery doctrine had no equivalent. Their batteries fired individually or in sequence. American observers reported German shelling as a rolling barrage, shells arriving in a pattern over time. German survivors reported American shelling as the ground exploding all at once. Here is a specific example. February 3, 1945. A German armored Kampfgruppe, roughly battalion strength, is moving along a road near St. Vith. They are 22 kilometers behind the front. They have been spotted by an American L-4 Grasshopper observation aircraft circling at 4,000 feet, far out of effective anti-aircraft range. The pilot radios coordinates to 3 separate artillery battalions, one equipped with 155mm guns, 2 with 8-inch howitzers. A total of 36 tubes. The fire direction centers calculate firing solutions. The guns are positioned 19, 23, and 26 kilometers from the target. Different ranges, different charge weights, but every calculation is designed so the shells arrive at the same moment. At 2:17 p.m., 36 shells, totaling over 14,000 pounds of high explosive, impact a 300-meter section of road. Simultaneously, the German column ceases to exist as a combat unit. Survivors report they had no warning. One moment they were marching. The next moment was fire and steel and then silence. This is what American artillery dominance looked like. It was not just about range. It was about a system, doctrine, training, and technology working together to create a capability that German forces could not match and could barely comprehend. By March 1945, German after-action reports stopped mentioning unknown American artillery. They know what it is now. but they also know they cannot stop it. Panzer divisions that once maneuvered aggressively now move cautiously, always aware that American guns can reach them almost anywhere behind the lines. The psychological edge that German armor once held, the sense of tactical superiority, has evaporated. American artillery did not just outshoot German guns. It outthought German doctrine, and in doing so, it turned the German army's own tactical assumptions into a liability that cost them thousands of casualties, and made every position behind their lines a potential death trap. The final irony? The Germans had the technology to build equivalent weapons. They had the engineering capability. What they lacked was the doctrine, the training system, and the command structure that would let them use those weapons to their full potential. They had spent decades perfecting artillery tactics built around direct observation. The Americans built a system around mathematics and coordination, and by the time the Germans realized they needed to adapt, it was far too late. So here is my question for you. Knowing that the Germans had similar industrial capability but completely different artillery doctrine, do you think they could have adapted if they had recognized the American system earlier in the war? Or was their entire command structure too committed to existing doctrine to make that kind of fundamental shift? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this changed how you understand the role of artillery in armored warfare, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that reveals the tactical innovations that changed everything. Thanks for watching.